Hi, everyone, and a big thank you to Espresso Tutorials for having us at the IAM and Security Summit. I'm Susan Stapleton, Vice President of Customer Advisory at Pathlock. In today's webinar, I'm going to talk about the evolution from SAP-centric to hybrid multi-cloud environments and why traditional GRC solutions like access control fall short in modern landscapes, and why you'll have to move out of app-specific silo reporting to see the full picture of your risk, and most importantly, focusing on your stakeholders for business user access reviews and even business privilege access management. So I just want to say up front, I'm a firm believer that your rule set is the foundation for everything you do when it comes to GRC and compliance. A lot of things are driven off of that rule set, and it's super important to keep that rule set accurate, up to date, and covering the applications that you need it to cover. I also think it's very important to have business ownership of the business processes that drive the business and the users who have access to those business processes or activities within those processes. So I'm going to be kind of focusing on that throughout this webinar, but a little bit more about the challenges we face. And I think of myself as a GRCer because I've been doing it for a long, long time. The traditional GRC solutions like access controls and others, whether for Oracle, Dynamics, SAP, you name it, they're pretty app specific, and they were built for an ERP with the thought that everything would be in that ERP. They never really designed or thought of looking outside of the core ERP systems that they managed. Many organizations still operate in application specific silos. SAP, Teams, Basis, Security. I talk to customers every day that still have an SAP team, and then there's other folks outside the IT security staff that handle things like access to Ariba, authorizations for Salesforce. And a lot of times the HR team manages the HR applications on their own, and they're usually pretty restricted to a certain number of people. But if you haven't already been deemed or discussed of this topic by your auditors, you most likely will be soon. The customers I'm talking to today are ones who have been caught off guard. Auditors are starting to say, hey, your whole procurement has moved to another application. All of your assets are controlled via another application still, and maybe your inventory is in another application. So all of these things typically belong in SoD risk sets, activities that you want to monitor. And if your auditor comes in and looks at your GRC solution and it's not covering those things, they're going to have an issue with that. And it's sooner or later that they're going to have an issue. And a lot of times when we're talking to customers today, it's not the GRC team, it's the CIO, the CISO, sometimes even the CFO. Because when the auditors have issues with things like this, it usually goes pretty high up the chain. I've talked about this challenge and I mentioned it already. The business needs to be accountable for what users do in the business applications. They need to own what are the processes, who has access to do those things, what are the segregation of duty risks, what are the controls that are in place. A lot of times that was put on IT and security, but they don't own the business process, and nor should they be the ones to determine what the risks are in the company. I think the way GRC rolled out in the early days, it was easy to put a team together. And it was typically thought of that it was security's responsibility to control all of that. And a lot of companies kind of still fall under that same method. But it is time to get outside of that and have the business own this. What we've been working hard at Pathlock is to have more of a business-facing UI, focus more on information for the business users, make their jobs easier. You need them to do user reviews, look at SoD reports, give them information in standard language that's not objects, fields, values, and so on, but the information that they need. And we've started referring to things like business user reviews, business privileged access management, because you want the business to be able to review those logs, review access requests, review user campaigns, and really make good decisions. I want to say another thing when you talk about the business folks. The business folks are not there to do compliance. And this kind of got pounded into me when I was at Anheuser-Busch. It's that we had the business own security, controls, segregation of duties, approve access, but the business people did that, but they weren't there to do that. That was not their job. It was a side gig, and their job was to make beer, to manufacture glass, to do other things. So keep that in mind, that the business people have a lot of jobs to do. They wear a lot of hats. Companies are running extremely lean in these times. And so it's also just doubly more important to make sure that when you get information in front of them, it's concise, it's context, so they can make decisions. So all of those things I think are very important when it comes to bringing your business into the mix. So a little bit about why it matters. Users have to have access to systems, but they really do need to be restricted to their job function. So when there are user access risks, they have to be controlled. And I would suggest you automate all of the SOD mitigation controls. It's kind of the business I'm in and have been in for several years at Pathlock, working with SAP customers, implementing CCM. But these things, if you have to put manual controls in place for risk, it's an extremely resource intensive and costly activity. And UARs are costly as well, as is the time and effort required to review and approve things like elevated access logs. All of those things are kind of problematic for customers today, and they're problematic just when you're dealing with SAP ERP. Just think about when you start adding more applications in. What I would say is, when you have the foundation, your good rule set, your processes, the culture to be compliant, audit tasks should just be a follow-on. They shouldn't be onerous or hard for the business to manage. When you have all of the data and all of the audit trails for automated processes in one GRC solution, successful audits are a byproduct of that in your compliance program. I'm going to start talking about the need to govern beyond SAP. So that's really what we're talking about today, being risk aware of all of these other applications that should be in scope. They have financial relevance, but you may not be able to monitor them today. So talk about that. So what's the challenge? I think if you are a GRC person, an admin, administrating any GRC solution, you're going to be familiar with this particular risk, right? Who can be able to do purchase orders, maybe purchase orders and approvals, and process invoices or payments. I mean, that is a standard SOD that we have been monitoring in SAP ERP forever. It's a basic risk definition, and underlying this definition in your GRC solution is all of the data needed to properly identify this SOD risk in your environment. And I'm going to say it was no easy task to kind of get your arms around this activity, even when everything's in SAP itself. So this is just an example of standard SOD risks. And all of us are probably very familiar with this. We have risk IDs, function IDs, combinations of functions make up our risk. So whether your risks are included in functions for procurement, inventory, accounts payable, assets, maybe it's vendor records, all of your SOD needs to be managed consistently in one GRC solution. And most of your rule sets probably started with this out-of-the-box rule set from SAP or something very similar. You added your custom T codes, you added document types for purchase orders, maybe keys for posting accounting documents. Anything that was custom got added to your rule set. And typically, hopefully, you worked with the business as you implemented more and more functionality in SAP, you kept this rule set up to date. So your risk library, to me, a lot of things build off of this. You have to have ownership of this by your business. They need to be agreeable that if I have an SOD, for instance, on the first line there, that people who can enter counts and clear differences in inventory should not be able to post journal entries. They need to buy into this, understand the risk, help you determine the risk, help you determine a control if people need to do this, and really own this, because the auditors are going to look at your risk set pretty much every time they come in. Well before companies started moving to S4, and when they started moving to S4, they really started adopting cloud solutions. But before then, a lot of companies adopted Ariba, especially SAP companies, and they also adopted usually SuccessFactors. Those were the two first cloud solutions we saw a lot. And if they didn't adopt Ariba, they adopted Coupa, Jagger, TradeShift, you name it. Lots of cloud solutions out there. But the fact of the matter is, core activities in your SOD risk set, in your business process, starts moving outside of core ERP. And this is where you start losing track of your segregation of duties because I moved my requisitioning or purchasing to Ariba and I no longer get SOD reports out of SAP that have that risk. It doesn't mean the risk is gone. It means that I need to shift my target application where I'm monitoring users and what they can do to Ariba for the procurement risks. And a lot of people at this point may have created dummy roles, dummy processes, figured out ways to do Ariba in almost like a workaround process, but that really puts you in a path that maybe the company thinks, okay, well, now I'm going to adopt Manhattan Warehouse Management. I'm going to adopt SoD Master Data Governance. I'm going to adopt, you name it, one tax, one source. All of those things start coming your way, your direction if you're in security. And then you have to figure out a process to handle those without maybe buying additional software. So just be careful not to go down that path. This is just an example of procurement moving outside of core. And what are some of the things you're going to want to monitor for? I also think it's important to understand if I'm moving everything outside of SAP or just some of my procurement functionality. An example of this for Ariba, a lot of companies start with sourcing and contracts. They may not have a lot of financial relevance from an SOD perspective when they roll out that core module. The next module may be requisitioning and purchases. That absolutely has an impact. And next year they may adopt invoicing through Ariba. So you have to stay on top of this and have these conversations with your application owner, process owner, combination of those, and your GRC team, and put a process in place up front as you start adopting these cloud solutions to make sure you have your risk well defined, and even go ahead and define controls as well as if you're going to have those risks. The other thing we've been doing for a long time, because as many of you may know, we've been a partner of SAP and we augmented the SAP access control functionality, and we still do for many customers. But one of the things we have been helping with is to extend access control to other applications. And the first thing you have to know is what is the user authorization or access authorization concept in those other applications. We think about identity management solutions kind of using coarse-grained or role-level information from these systems to do SODs, but you really have to go to that fine-grained level to understand how to create a purchase order in Ariba, how to receive goods in the Manhattan Warehouse Management System, how to process pricing or sales order in Salesforce. And so this is one of the things we've been doing for a long time, is normalizing security authorization concepts to make them all apples to apples. So when we do reporting against any of these applications, we are always producing correct reports. You all know if you get a false report, take it to the business or someone else and they question it or start investigating, then they feel like they have to do that all the time. Your SOD reporting is pretty, I want to say, I guess, worthless to me. If I had a report and I couldn't depend on that report and I needed to go dig into things all the time, I would really question if I had the right solution. So we always go to the finest grained authorization concept or lowest level to make sure that we are always getting accurate reports from an SOD perspective. I'm just going to show a couple of screens from Pathlock Application Access Governance here. We were an application built for cross-system. That's how we were designed up front. We weren't just one ERP or multiple ERPs. We were built to be able to manage hundreds of applications in one GRC solution. You can help with documenting processes across your applications. You can partner with your internal controls team, but you have to figure out what risks you want. You have to get them defined, loaded into an application in order to start being able to run your reports. In Pathlock GRC, our application access governance, you see cross-system risk. This one is release requisitions, maintain PO across SAP ERP and SAP Ariba. You also need single system risk. You're going to have single system risk in some of your cloud applications, just like you had single system risk in SAP. And you're going to have handfuls of cross-system risk for each of these best-of-breed cloud solutions. I think it's just super important to bring the business people into your user access management process, have the documentation you require that's relevant to you and your business. We deliver a ton of content like this, but real world examples, best practices, how to put controls in place, being able to kind of tag them as different processes or compliance frameworks. So we provide a lot of information, again, more for the business side of the house, so that they can better take ownership of some of these activities. We always have to go, like I said, to the lowest level of, the rule set building. And super important in today's world to have all of your Fiori tiles or Fiori apps listed, because those give people access to do these activities as well. So this particular SoD I'm drilling into, part of it's done in SAP, which is maintain purchase order. You're going to see all of your standard objects, Fiori apps, and so on how you can maintain purchase orders within an SAP ERP. You're also going to see that the conflicting function here is release requisitions in Ariba. Now, Ariba's got one of the most simplified authorization concepts. It's a role and it's groups within a role. So that's the lowest level you need to. If you have this group, then you can process a purchase order. So you won't see a lot of detailed authorization information for things like Ariba. You get into Salesforce, it's extremely complex. You see a lot of information out here. And that's another thing we can provide is rule sets for a lot of the cloud applications. But it's just super important that you always go to the level that actually allows that user to do that activity. And I think you need a GRC solution that was built for stakeholders. All of your stakeholders across the process, whether you need very detailed granular reports for IT security to actually go remediate things, whether you need dashboard reporting for your board level updates that happen periodically now, or just different levels for your business owners, risk owners, application owners, all of that information should be in your GRC solution. You can also see, underneath segregation of duties, employees, violations, just different ways of how these violations are occurring and which roles these are coming from. And again, this is your cross-system view of an SoD risk. This is just the P2P process again. The other flow I showed you was actually just the activities within Ariba. The important activity here is to ensure GRC and procurement teams or sales teams or inventory materials management teams or finance align to understand what activities are moving outside of your ERP, what's moving initially, and then stay aligned with those teams to ensure the rule set stays up to date when more and more functionality gets adopted. You could even have multiple cloud solutions in your procure-to-pay process. So exactly the same as your prior SAP rule set, when a team created new rules and or transactions or doc types or movement types, rolled out additional functionality that you might have risk in. You do the same for these cloud applications. You meet, you figure out what's moved, you look at your rule set, you understand how to map those activities, and you get connected to those applications so that you can run SOD reports in and across those systems, compliantly provision automatically to those systems, have all of those systems and their users and their role assignments in your user access reviews, which I'm going to talk about next. But really just things are going to change, and they're going to change fast. And this is just the reality of what we need to focus on and make sure that we have in place is a comprehensive enterprise-wide access rule set. This is kind of going to give you a visual of what I'm talking about. If you look at from a supply chain perspective, maybe here are your first 30 P2P risks that are delivered with SAP Access Control. It's a standard rule set that pretty much everybody that has SAP is familiar with. If you look at these, you'll see that if I just move my purchase order and requisitioning purchasing agreements over to Ariba, it's going to affect almost 20 of these first 30 risks that I'm going to need to make some updates in my rule set. So the other thing I would do here is understand, am I doing direct purchases in Ariba, indirect purchases only, or all of my purchases going to Ariba? Because this is nothing more than master data that you're setting up your rule set with and for. Maybe I still leave these exactly the same as they are today because my indirect purchases are only going to move to Ariba. Then I would create a new function called maintaining purchase orders in Ariba for indirect purchases, and probably just duplicate every one of these risks and throw in the duplicated risk ID a new ID and say I'm going to maintain these purchase orders in Ariba, and I still want to monitor if I did the purchase order and received the goods. One set would be purchase orders in SAP versus goods receipt in SAP. The other would be maintain purchase orders in Ariba versus goods receipt in SAP. Again, just thinking through your master data and how you would set this up. So what if I adopt a new inventory management system, a warehouse management system? It's just going to continue to be complex. You're going to have to figure out how to get these things in. And there's just this many more risks now that you may have to duplicate to get a good picture of what's happening. You know, some of the things that might happen is that I may only move EMEA to a Manhattan warehouse. And in the US, I'm going to use SAP to do all my goods receipts and all my inventory management. I know that's complex, but that's the reality of what companies are doing today. Or I'm going to go country by country and move to Manhattan warehouse management. Those things your rule set needs to follow. So you're going to have to step through and just make sure that you're maintaining your risks as you do that. These are the SoD functions I see in Manhattan warehouse management. And if you are familiar with the materials management codes in SAP in the standard rule set, you know, handle stock movement with reference to a purchase order is the equivalent of the function of goods receipts to a purchase order. Entering physical inventory counts is the same as inventory counts IM, right? So you can kind of take a look at these. And I think the SAP rule set that you probably have, if you were an access control customer using the standard SAP risk set, it's perfectly fine just to kind of swap out those functions of where you're actually doing these activities now. And you will have inter-system risk as well, right? Who can enter physical inventory counts and scrap goods? That's a risk within warehouse management itself that you would want to put in your rule set. One more example. Let's say I adopt or acquire Synity or maybe Informatica. I'm adopting a master data management solution that's being rolled out across the company. Just think about how many more SOD risks that covers. You're starting to get your supply chain almost moved outside of SAP. Your financials still stay in SAP, your invoices, your payments, and so on. But a lot of these other things are going to best of breed cloud solutions. And so just think about that. Vendor master, material master, customer master, that affects a tremendous amount of your segregation of duties. You can see how quickly this can kind of, I don't say spit out of control, it's completely controllable. But you just have to stay on top of it. And you have to be going live with new rule sets or risk updates as you go live with these applications. And it could be country by country, you know, continent by continent, or business unit by business unit. So before I move on, I kind of want to wrap up this rule set discussion this way. Monitoring user access across processes and systems requires a comprehensive GRC solution, one that was built for cross-system, allows building of fine-grained rules, and reports SODs in and across multiple business applications. And as you define the process for one cloud app, just know that more will be coming your way, and you need a solution and processes to help kind of bring all of that together and keep it up to date and current, because compliance has to live and transform just as the same as you're transforming your business with either S4 adoption or whatever the case may be. And all of your follow-on activities, building compliant business roles, provisioning compliant access, monitoring or reporting SODs or critical access in your UAR request or your firefight logs. All of that is dependent on your SOD rule set. So it's the most important building block of your GRC program. So the next thing I want to talk about is user access reviews. This is one of those controls that is often seen as a compliance checkbox activity, but it really is a foundational control for both security and governance. The user access review is about answering who has access to what and should they have that access. If you don't have a good transfer and termination policy, access will tend to kind of accumulate over time as people change roles, departments, maybe projects, moving in and off of projects. And many times there's not a process to remove access that's no longer required. UARs are a huge burden for IT, for the business, and many times, like I said, it's a check the box for audit, but it's a tremendous amount of work to not get value. There's this check the box mentality for UARs because they're too difficult. It serves no one. It doesn't serve IT, the business. Auditors are getting pretty savvy too, that really nothing's happening except rubber stamping when it comes to these user access reviews. As I said, they're foundational controls for SOX and financial controlling. Regular access reviews are required to ensure sensitive data is accessible only to authorized individuals. It gives both IT and business owners visibility and clarity into who has access to do what, and it enforces accountability across the business and by the business. User access reviews should be done by risk owners, users managers, maybe location owners, people who know business processes, what people should be doing in those business processes, and what kind of activities they should be doing in their day-to-day business. I mean, it's super important that the business take accountability for what users are doing. And when it comes to user access reviews, it's important to provide the reviewer, whoever that may be, clear, concise, meaningful data, and help them make informed decisions. They check the box, they rubber stamp, because it's too hard to really understand what they're looking at. And I don't blame them, frankly. So what are some of the challenges related to user access reviews? I think, again, if you are siloed, a lot of times people do SAP one way, and it could have been an access control. They'll do Salesforce, SuccessFactors, maybe spreadsheets. Some of the cloud applications have good exports to get the data out, but you still have to go to a third source to understand who's the manager, who's the risk owner, who do I want to do this review. So a good user access review, which is what I'm going to focus on today, it just cannot be done via spreadsheets and multiple different avenues to do it. Whether it's online, you can do user access reviews in some of the identity management solutions. But what I'm going to focus on today really is a user access review being done by a user manager and really making sure that they can see all of the data that user has access to in all of the systems. User access and their access risk, as I said, don't live in one system. They're distributed across an entire application landscape. So should the user access review be covering that entire access landscape. We need to be able to see enterprise-wide visibility and make sure we have control over all of these apps. This means expanding certification programs, access governance to include SAP, non-SAP, maybe even custom applications to have a centralized user access review approach. Establish a single source of truth for your user identities and making sure we get that information, managers and so on, and apply consistent policies and review processes across these critical business apps. The benefits of a unified review are improved audit readiness because fragmented, inconsistent access control processes are replaced with a centralized framework. UAR compliance for these critical apps is going to be demonstrated through detailed logs, audit trails, and it's fairly fast and easy to produce evidence when it's all done via one centralized repository. You can improve efficiency because reviewers no longer have to log into multiple systems, decipher different role names, chase data manually. It's going to save them time, reduce errors, and prevent review fatigue. And one of the things I love about what we do is provide context in the way of peer reviews for single system, cross system, access history, usage. Usage is something that's huge for SAP reviews. Well, we can provide usage for other applications as well. And all of that gives the reviewer much more information so that they can properly make decisions on the review. I talked about it too, to think about it as a business review, business UAR. And it kind of puts a different spin on it than a typical IT UAR, where you have technical folks looking at this. So think about it from a business aspect of what kind of information would be important to them. To enable reviewers, we present in our solution a clear and intuitive interface. They can evaluate access for each employee, and they can see all of the different types of access they have, the different types of systems. And I said before, this is a user access review. The screens I'm going to show you is where the access review is performed by the user manager. These could be done by app owners. They could be done all kinds of different types of campaigns and reviews. But in this particular case, it's going to be the user manager. The reviewer here can see Carol has access to PeopleSoft, Oracle. She also has access to SAP and Microsoft Active Directory. So we can see all of the access that she has in this one screen. I can look at information I pulled from the user source. What's her job title? Who's her manager? Where does she sit? What are the types of roles she has? All of that information I can see as well. And this is really a drill down on this one specific role, which was a composite, so I could see the single roles underneath. I can see if any of these transaction codes in the SAP access has been used. I can see if there's critical transactions in the access that she has and what those critical transactions are. And again, I see usage for these things. And then this is where you can get into historical data and peer review. And I want to say too, this is all there in the system. We don't have to go out and do downloads or pull data in specifically for user access reviews. All of this data already resides in Pathlock Cloud. Here I can see users of the same manager that have the same role as Carol. I can see users that have the same job title or position, and which of those users also have this role. I can see the history of the last review. Or actually, this is when the role was provisioned, approved, who approved it, requested it, who approved it, when was it provisioned. And then I can see the last certification date and time and who approved that or reviewed this role assignment at that time. So to me, this is huge that you can give all kinds of contextual information to the reviewer so that they can make well-informed business decisions as to should these users have this access. So wrapping up that section, I think UARs are too costly to not gain value. It means no rubber stamping. When you can perform UARs, or when you do perform UARs for different systems, different ways, manually extracting data, having to do a lot of manipulation to that data, providing little or no context, there's just no way to accurately review a user's access. Centralizing UARs for business applications alone can provide an entire ROI for something like a new GRC solution. Okay, almost done. Just a couple more quick things. I want to just take you on through to firefighting and think about this the way business firefighting, business PAM, privileged access management, business elevated access management, whatever you want to call it, really focusing your audit log review for your business user review. Again, a business user, a manager, they own SuccessFactors, they own the Ariba, they own the processes that flow through those business applications, and they need to own the review when people get exceptional access to those applications. We can provide you a consistent approach to get access to any of those business systems where we can provide firefighting audit logging. So for Ariba, BTP, SuccessFactors, Workday, one centralized repository, one place to come in and select your request for what system you want to do firefighting in. We provision the access. It's time bound. We can do role or ID based. So either one for most systems. Some systems have to be role based. Other systems have to be ID based. So but we can normalize all of that through one request process. And we would revoke this access after 2 hours or 4 hours or whatever the case may be. And once that access is revoked, we create the audit log and workflow that out to the business owner to review. So it's really important to have, I think, information for that business user to see, did they insert records? Did they make changes? If they made changes to critical data, can we show them from and to values? The answer is yes to all of those things. One of the things I want to talk about for Ariba, if you've not gone through an audit yet, your auditors, there's an Ariba role called customer administrator. That's the role you have to assign if anybody needs to do emergency type access repairs or emergency activities in Ariba. Well, your auditors are going to want to know several things, such as when they got the keys to the kingdom in Ariba, did they create a user? Did they approve purchase orders? Did they change configuration? And Ariba produces this humongous log of everything that happens in the system. It goes into one log, and it is impossible to get through from an audit perspective. We can assign the role through Firefighter. We can log everything that happens while that user's in there with that customer administrator role. And we could tell the business owner, when they review the log, what the user did in Ariba and what values did they change from and to, did they insert records, did they create a user? All of those things would be in the audit log. And that's how you would respond to a customer administrator audit for Ariba. Another one is SuccessFactors. Auditors expect you to lock down the proxy ID in SuccessFactors. The proxy ID is what gives users, a normal user, exceptional access. So auditors want you to have a process that you only assign proxy IDs through a very consistent approach with approvals along that process. We can do that in SuccessFactors. Only allow proxy IDs to be assigned via Firefight process. And then again, we would report any entries, new transactions, from and to values of what users did in SuccessFactors. I'm going to finish up with SAP because SAP Firefight logs, there's just a handful of things that they're monitoring for. SM20, SUIM, CDHDR, CDPAUSE, there's a couple of others, but there's so many other logs in SAP today that are critical that are not getting logged through SAP Firefighter. There are things like OData APIs being set up, maybe configured in the gateway, which opens up a lot of activity. There are Fiori apps being used. I don't think those still are reported in SAP's audit logs for firefighting. OData services. There's just a lot more places that firefighters can have access to that need to be logged in the firefight log. We also can track table changes or updates. So it's just a big difference in the level of activities that we're reporting when it comes to firefighter. All right, well, I just wanted to kind of wrap up here with the requirements of a comprehensive GRC solution. You should be able to govern all of your critical applications for SOX, GDPR, PII, any of the regulatory requirements you have that all in one solution. Automate your user access reviews and make business context aware so that users can review the data, see exactly what users are doing, and make informed decisions on whether users should retain that access. Audit-proof Firefighter for all of your applications, SAP and cloud applications, and being able to have an audit log process there. I was going to talk a little bit about CCM, but in our same platform, this is all together in one platform, we have the ability to pick up and monitor risk, which users did in SoD, who created a purchase order in Ariba, approved it in Ariba, and received the goods in Manhattan Warehouse Management System. What was the document number, the date of the receipt, and so on. So we can go through your systems, look at posted transactions, identify actual SODs, and surface those up for the business to review. And surface the exceptions only. We do the heavy lifting, we find the actual risky things that happen, and we can push those out to be reviewed. That same CCM solution does ITGCs for these applications, SAP and non-SAP, business process controls. So just to kind of give you an idea, we have a very comprehensive GRC platform from application governance to CCM And we have a lot of cyber activities or solutions as well. All right, so just a quick wrap up here. We have connectors, we have a team, we are investing heavily in this space, we're innovating in this space. We have a team that's doing nothing but building and mapping integrations to business applications. And that's a very big team. We also have a team that's focused on content. Content is king. I always used to say that, we still say that. Being able to have CCMs ready to go, being able to have SoD rule sets. We deliver things like workflows, standard workflows that get you up and running very quickly. So when I say we're focused on developing and delivering content, that's a heavy area of focus for us that we don't see other vendors doing. So anyway, I just want to say this is our focus. GRC is what we do. It's really all we do. We provide a centralized portal for compliant provisioning across applications, which is huge. Unified user access reviews, all of the follow-ups automated, whether it's removing access or closing tickets, things like that. We have very strong audit and reporting capabilities that support both the business and audit and other stakeholders. Removes a lot of the audit evidence complexities. It's all right here. We can also enforce effectiveness, control effectiveness with the automation of the key activities in the compliance tasks. When you automate these activities, remove manual error, different things like that, not only do you run better, faster, with less resources, it's going to be more accurate. And there's going to be audit trails that you can provide to your auditors. So I just want to say, whether you're just getting started, you don't have any GRC solution or programs in place, or you're looking to take your existing enterprise access governance to the next level, we can provide solutions to help meet you where you are and fill any gaps or challenges that you're trying to alleviate. Let us know, and we're happy to help with any of those things. And that wraps up our session. A big thank you again to Espresso Tutorials for hosting the IAM and Security Summit, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.